I'm talking to Juanita Brown, who is co-founder of the World Cafe. Juanita, what exactly is the World Cafe?
The World Cafe is a very creative way of hosting dialogue where very large groups or much smaller groups can meet together talking about questions that matter to their common future, whatever the situation might be. And it's a vehicle for using the dynamics of network conversation to actually evolve new and unexpected kinds of insights.
So you mean all these conversations are actually taking place on the internet?
No, they're taking place face-to-face. Although we have an internet component, an actual World Cafe dialogue is a face-to-face conversation where people are sitting at small tables just like in a real cafe, are writing on their tablecloths just like you would write on a napkin, and after a period of time in the conversation, people travel to new tables carrying the seed ideas from their conversation, and if I'm a host, I'll be receiving new people for mine. And as the conversations iterate and cross-pollinate, new and exciting emergent insights reveal themselves because the network dynamics begins to spark exciting possibilities.
So what sort of things do you discuss?
Oh, it has all over the world been discussed in many different ranges, from global marketing strategy for Coca-Cola to indigenous rights in New Zealand and village development in Ghana and church groups and many aspects of civic engagement efforts in local communities, including here in the city of Menlo Park and Redwood City.
Is there some kind of methodology involved here which is different from what a group of people would just accomplish by sitting around and talking?
Yes, there's a very specific methodology that involves 7 key principles for designing a World Cafe conversation, just like you would design an architecture for any other kind of engagement. And so we encourage people to set the context, to create hospitable space, to explore questions that matter, to listen together for insights and deeper questions, to share collective discoveries. They're very simple principles, but when those principles are used together with these iterating rounds of conversation, it's actually quite unexpected and exciting what happens. And I think that's why it's spread all over the world. It's a total global dialogue movement at this stage.
Now, have any actual new ideas come out of this that have actually been useful or practical?
Oh, yes. For example, the Museum of Science and Industry has helped in Tampa Bay, Florida, has helped to redesign the museum using World Cafe conversations that have involved citizen participation in the redesign of the museum. They've also been using World Cafe dialogues in terms of developing their budgets and new ideas for how to work more effectively in the future of the museum and what it can provide to the community. So there's a lot of those kinds of ideas. It's also being used in corporate settings, in strategy work, a lot.
Do people hire you to come into a corporation and organize it for them? Or is this something that anybody could organize on their own once they have the idea of what to do?
Once they have the idea, they can organize it on their own. The principles are very simple, and if you've participated in a World Cafe dialogue, if you have any capacity to work with groups, if you have some background in working with groups, then it's actually quite simple to do. So there's an art to it, and at the same time it's simple.
So if a person wants to be an effective participant in this kind of group, are there any rules that that person has to observe?
Well, we have what we call cafe etiquette. And cafe etiquette involves listening together. So it's not just me and you listening to each other, but us both listening together to what's happening in the center of the table, as one example. We're encouraging people to cross-pollinate, link and connect ideas. So I'm listening not just to hear your idea, but to sense what's the connection between our ideas, so that we're actually linking and building throughout the iterating rounds of conversation. We're asking people to draw on the tablecloths so that they can really see what each other means, because many people are visual and not just auditory. And then we ask people to move from table to table in a creative way and in a hosted way, so that they can carry their seed ideas from one conversation to the next.
Now, how does this get started? Who decides what the topic of discussion is?
Great question. People usually gather in a World Cafe dialogue in order to work on something that they hold in common. So, for example, here at the Program for the Future gathering, people are really thinking about what is the future of collective intelligence. It's something they really care about together. And so a World Cafe dialogue might be constructed to focus on what are the most exciting possibilities for the future of collective intelligence that we ourselves might contribute to.
After the conversations, is there a next step? Let's say people gather and they meet to discuss an issue and a certain type of consensus emerges. Does the methodology carry into the next step where the recommendations are followed up on?
Absolutely. I mean, there are ways of using multiple doorways to collective intelligence in a face-to-face way, as well as in the online aspect. This is where, to me, the combination between face-to-face work and harvesting the knowledge online, sharing knowledge and harvesting it together, allows larger and larger circles to participate in implementation and further idea creation, just as we've been discussing here in the conference.
Do you think this can apply to any type of problem, or are there some types of problems which maybe this process would not work that well?
I think armed conflict situations actually
would not work well
because there's a lot more pre-work than normally happens in a World Cafe dialogue, although it is being used in multi-stakeholder engagements around critical questions like climate change or whatever, where people with very differing viewpoints come in to a situation. But where there are long-standing, raging hostilities, then it needs another, I would say, another level of facilitation for the World Cafe as part of a longer process. But I'm more interested not only in the World Cafe, but in the whole possibility of collective intelligence, for which the World Cafe is only one doorway. And there are many face-to-face doorways for that kind of new thinking to evolve when connected with the technology. That's where our possibilities lie.
Now, the phrase collective intelligence, it sort of implies that different minds sort of operate together as one mind and the individual kind of disappears. Is that what we're talking about?
No, not in the domain of collective intelligence that we work with. It is more that the unique contribution of individual minds and complementarity are co-evolving something that no individual mind would have done by itself, but the individual is never lost in the process. Their unique contributions and honoring unique contributions is one of the cardinal principles of the design of the World Cafe and of others of these modalities that are really bringing new thinking to bear on critical questions.
Has collective intelligence been gaining any traction, becoming more popular, used by people who, say, want to use it for profit? They want to make their businesses more successful.
It was very interesting. The World Cafe was actually born in our living room in a global dialogue, a leading-edge dialogue, a strategic dialogue, which was focused on the area of intellectual capital and knowledge management. It was brought to the U.S. for an interdisciplinary dialogue being hosted by the Skandia Corporation in Sweden with the person who was the world's first director of intellectual capital before the knowledge management field had ever been named. And out of that, which was a corporate dialogue, because my background was in corporate strategy, the entire knowledge management sort of proliferation began to accelerate. So it was in corporate settings where the World Cafe was born, but now more and more it's so exciting to see how it's happening in communities all over the country and all over the world, and in different kinds of professional groups and associations, the American Society for Quality, for example, and many other settings.